Welcome, everybody. My name is Mina Jane. I'm the director of the Ashland Public Library in Massachusetts, and I'm very excited to be here with Eric Hanson, who has written a true crime novel called Dead End Road. And I cannot wait to hear what he has to say about this case and what he's done in his research, because I'm fascinated by all of that. But before we get to Eric, I just want to say thanks to the Friends of the Ashland Public Library for supporting all of our programs. And we just couldn't do this without them. And I'd also like to thank Eric for letting us share this program with other libraries because, when libraries work together, we make magic. And we are right now, the chat is off, only to coming to hosts and panelists, meaning Eric and I. It will stay off through this program. So if you want to chat with one of us, feel free to put that in the chat, anything in the chat. If you have questions for Eric, though, please put those in the Q&A and I will moderate them after his slides. You can buy signed books from Eric directly, and I will put information about that in my recap email, which I will send out to everybody after the program. So, Eric, thank you so much for being here. I know that this is a very personal case for you, and I also know it's a very unusual kind of book for you because you usually write Western and horror fiction. So I'm very curious as to how this all came about.
That's a it's a good way to lead in. So I will thank people for having me. If I sweat too much, I'm Scandinavian and it's a million degrees outside, and so if I melt on camera, that's why. In regards to the content, yeah, I mean, you know, there's an internal part of me that's fascinated by dark material. Not to say necessarily that I accomplished that with my westerns, but in terms of, I went to NYU for dramatic writing and people would always respond to the darker material and this and that, like, oh, like they'd be like almost, semi uncomfortable sometimes, whether the finished product was really good, but it would just be like you kind of really know how to get under people's skin. But I think I just kind of have that type of sensibility, and it actually relates to my own upbringing, which I might mention a little later, because the way the book is crafted. I talk about my own upbringing as I'm, connected to this case and when it happened and this and that. But in terms of the journey, it's actually a great question to start with I because I get bored and I like to learn a lot. I applied to UMass Lowell to get a criminal justice for a master's degree online.
Mhm.
And long story short, I'll make it as quick as I can, was I'm looking at what you have to do for the program, and it's probably about 10 to 12 classes. Well, for the final couple of classes, they said you could do a writing project as long as it's approved. So in my head, I'm like, oh, wow, I've always wanted to write a true crime book. I'm just going to Google, are there any unsolveds in my hometown? Just thinking like place, like, because I'm like thinking 2 or 3 years ahead. Well, there's an unsolved one, and it's about a girl, Renee Freer, who we're going to talk about tonight. And I'm I'm not a heartless person, but I would have just kept moving right along. I would have probably just lived in the zone of, wow, there's an unsolved in my hometown. That's so terrible. I would have had that feeling. But there was an old Facebook post, I think from 2012, 2014, forgive me, I don't have the dates in front of me. And it said the point of contact was a man named Kenneth Heim, who was my first stepfather. So I'm looking back at the dates. I'm looking when he worked the case. I'm like, I lived with him for a few years and he was working on this case and I never knew about it. So it was like a whoa.
Mhm.
And even though my mom and him divorced, there was no bad blood. I just didn't see him over the years. Life moved on. I didn't see I affectionately refer to him as ex stepsisters. But but it forced me to contact him and reach out. But and I was partially felt a little bit guilty. I'm like, what a heel I am that I'm reaching out to ask about a case. But I always liked him. I always cared about him. And we got to talking, and it was just to kind of hear the tenor in his voice about how much he cared about this one. It's the only unsolved in Monroe. It's an 8-year-old girl. He visits her grave annually. Like this has tormented him,
Mm.
along with others in the police force in that department. For last night was the 48th anniversary of her death. So you could kind of speak to any cop. There's that energy,
Mhm.
and so that really was, I was like, whoa, I have to write something. And it was less even about UMass Lowell or something for them. And quite frankly, I didn't know how I would write it. I didn't know if I would get it and done by the time that program is. And here I have, which some could argue a rushed product, but I announced this book, it gets some press. The cops release a statement that they have a person of interest after all that time. This is last year, and it just felt like I got to get this out. And quite frankly, my first stepfather, I just call him stepfather, even though I have a newer one who I love as well. Um, it just felt like his health has been up and down. I'll be totally honest, and I care about Renee and what I've learned, and it's tragic, but my motor has been to try and get something out there for my first stepfather and to
Mhm.
get exposure. And quite frankly, it's kind of worked, whether people even read my book or not. It's taken on its own little energy. So
Mhm.
that's the long and short of it.
Yeah, you had told me right before we started that there's actually a Dateline article coming out about this, or just came out yesterday. So you really helped shine a light on this, which is amazing. For somebody just like kind of like writing for a course and finding out that they can have an impact, right?
Yeah, you you go through so many. It's one, can I write something true crime? I don't sit around and live with a as a writer or creator, I don't really sit around and go, am I going to be embarrass myself? I don't have any necessarily fear about what I will put out, but it's a different animal when you go, these are real people. These are real people who grieve. This is a real community that not only grieve, but is still grieving. That I talk to and reach out to people who are like, you were born a year out after the crime. Why are you doing this? You don't have any, and you have to respect the reaction.
Hmm.
And while I have that first stepfather connection, the other counter, which arguably is me kind of digging my heels in the sand a little bit fresh, was, well, the last thing written about this case was an article from 1999.
Hmm.
So you can dislike me doing this all you want. I didn't create it to slander anybody, even after everything I learned. No one is slandered in that book.
Hmm.
But it became this like nobody else did anything. So good, bad, or ugly results. It was like exposure tool, and let's just see what it could work. And I know it inspired and motivated my first stepfather as much as it also there is a little bit of a regret on my end because then he'd have some times where he couldn't tell me something about the case, but then he was also like it like reignited his desire to want it solved, which I've kind of I'll be real. I was like, why did I do this? He was probably going through his days, like occasionally thinking about it, not thinking maybe there's hope here.
Hmm.
Um, but with that huge gap in our communication, he didn't know I was in education. He didn't know I went to a writing program. He didn't know I wrote books. He didn't know I had connections to the press that I knew I could get attention on this. Not even the book. I knew I could just shine, we could get press
Hmm.
because of my connections. Even if people were like the book's garbage and this and that, I knew we could get this case back out there. But yeah, I kind of felt bad because I was like, wow, I
Wow.
this one really bothers him, and I just like anybody in the equation, you got to respect their feelings and go.
Hmm.
I'm
What are
born 1 year after the time. I'm from the town, but I'm 1 year after the crime. So it's like it's a who are you? How dare you? And I own it, but also knew I had to do something.
Why don't we start the slides
Sure.
and you can tell the story and then we'll come back for questions because I'm sure we'll uh, do a ton while you're talking. So again, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A and I'll ask them of Eric after his slides. So let's get this going. Can everybody see that?
We go.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you can see the slides, right?
Yeah, looks good on my end. I'm hoping it's good on everybody. So I just want to thank Mina here. I have to totally be real. I'm normally good with Google Meet, and I didn't know how to share this. So if you want to rag on me in any other forum, our Facebook, feel free. But Mina is saving the day here. So, okay. And starting with this case, so just for real quick context, it's not to talk about myself, but just so people understand. I was born in 1978, a little more than a year after this crime. I grew up in this crime happened in Monroe, Connecticut. So here we have the Renee Freer case, June 22nd, 1977. So if you do the math, if you walk it back to yesterday, yesterday was the 48-year anniversary of this horrible crime. So to the 70 plus that are in here, I appreciate every one of you being here. If you knew nothing about the case, if you know something about the case, that's great. But so I had that personal in, the connection to the criminal justice program, the connection to my first stepfather. So that's really my in. What, aside from that emotionally, and I'm careful to kind of operate and lead with my emotions as a writer because it kind of, you don't want to preach to an audience. It's kind of a delicate game. And also when we're dealing with true events, true crimes, I really had to try and think about how could I craft this without upsetting everybody, but putting out something. So the case, you see a spotlight here, and there'll be a few names. I'm not going to share their exact names just for privacy's sake. You don't know who's listening, and I don't mean that to like scare anybody, but sometimes I don't know who's been in a Facebook group monitoring me or this and that. So I'm not going to mention particular names, but this photo was provided by someone Renee knew. So there's Renee in the middle. Now that little image of her with that beaming smile is on the cover of my book. Now, when there is a different picture, which I will show, which is a more accurate representation of what she looked like at the time of her passing. But I just want to start. This is an old portrait. So basically, you have just a little context about Renee, just like the picture looks like. I mean, this is somebody that, I mean, we're talking, she was written up in a local paper about getting an award in like second grade. I could be wrong about that. It was something I learned later after the book, but like this is somebody that like went out of her way, had like in third grade, had an energy to be good to others and like help others who were like shy and awkward on the bus. And I mentioned that in a book. I get a direct quote from somebody. I'm not going to mention their name and this and that, but it's just like kind of a wise beyond her years 8-year-old, which is remarkable to say out loud. But let's just kind of dive right into the case. Okay. So I'm ready to move to the next slide. So we'll just jump right in. Okay. So this was an image that was provided to me later, and this is more or less what Renee looked like. This is how everybody kind of knows Renee near the time of when this happened. So time and location. So you have Monroe, Connecticut, which at the time, I'd want to say Monroe, Connecticut, where I grew up, is a little over 20,000 in terms of population. It was at least half that back then. Okay, so you have Monroe, Connecticut. It's Williams Drive. It's just like this cul-de-sac where you go up and there's an area which leads to the woods. It's just a bunch of it's just a little small community. Now, people were saying that what was so interesting about the neighborhood, you had people own homes, and then there were renters. And there's this like, I want to say divide, but it just kind of created a different energy in the neighborhood. So here's Renee. Now, the time that people need to understand is, so you have June 22nd, which might sound a little bit later than schools today. You have snow days and whatever can delay things, but this was the eve of her last day of third grade. Okay, so she gets home, whatever she does for a few hours. She goes out to play in the neighborhood, which kids her age were doing. It wasn't unheard of. Like I said, I grew up 1 year later, 8 or 9 years later, I'm doing the same thing. And you're like, where are the parents? Like you feel like you're getting away with just like anything. But so she went to her neighbors around 6:30. So she had a neighbor next door who's a few years older than her, about 3 years older than her, went over there to see if she can play. And now, in the journey of my research, this has been a huge piece of the story. Was the girl, the friend, home, or was she not there? Well, over time, it just this tug of war about what really happened, and was this friend home? You had many stories. People said, "Oh, uh, her parents wouldn't let her out because they were eating dinner," and then an equal amount of people said, "No, she wasn't even there. She was already out in the neighborhood. Renee wasn't even anywhere, near her. Couldn't even get access to her." Um, I'm going to put a little teaser in here. The cops have kind of revealed in a recent podcast, and then we'll talk about the Dateline article a little bit later, that the friend wasn't home. So Renee goes next door, 6:30. And if we jump down, I'm not going to spoil the time, the timeline. It's nothing to smile about, but the timeline was something that baffled people that got involved with this for the longest time. How long was Renee out? What was going on? Like, where was her mom? Well, that the answer to that is her mom went out to the grocery store to buy baking goods for the last day of school. She's going to make, bake things for the kids on their final day. How nice is that? Well, she goes out, comes back, you do the call out in the neighborhood. Renee's not coming back. Whether there was an immediate response, I can't really say. There might have been a call out. You hear nothing. She goes to the store. You come back. Um, Renee's mother's parents were in the house as well. So it just kind of seemed like the nature of the neighborhood and what they were doing. Um, Also understand it's just this little note. Chalk Hill is actually the middle school I attended. It's been changed the name to Jockey Hollow. But they had graduation parties in the neighborhood, nearby streets that night. There might have been one or two. But so Renee goes next door, 6:30. Mom goes to this door. Mom comes back. She's checked on Renee. She's called out to Renee, and nothing's happened. No response. And then police get involved, firefighters get involved, and you could see by the text there, firefighters and police found her body in the woods around 10:15. That might be off by a few minutes, but it's in the 10:10 to 10:15 range. Um, and sadly for Renee, which is absolutely horrible, her head was bludgeoned with a rock. Okay. And um, it is one of those things where you read and hear about, you look at the girl's face, like just anyone, for this to happen to anyone is just so shocking and horrible. It's like, what can an 8-year-old girl possibly do to deserve anything like this? That was the nature of it. And there is a note at the bottom, because 3 murders occurred in Connecticut that day. Renee received a hospital autopsy. Now, in terms of the specifics, I spoke to a few cops, former cops. There was one who worked the case who was quite frankly reluctant to tell me anything, but he was basically said the difference between a forensic autopsy and a hospital one was like night and day. It's like hospital, very basic autopsy. You're not really looking for signs of this and that. And forensic is such a way more thorough approach and this and that. Now, enough time has passed where I have to kind of be, not just me, but others have to be quite reflective about that and go, was that the one miscalculation? Now, to be fair to the cops, the state is put under that pressure to make a decision. So, did they rush something? Could they have waited for a forensic autopsy? What would that have meant a day later? I don't have those answers. I can't say it's the definite and only mistake that this case would have been solved 48 years ago. I don't know that that's true. Um, but people do seem to think it was a significant error. But like I said, if you're looking at the 3 murders occurring that day, this is high stakes tension for, you know, Connecticut and their limited resources and wondering what to do and how to proceed. It's easy to look at this picture and go, she should have taken top priority, which I think I've ranted and vented in my book, which is it's not necessarily fair in how things operate, but um, it seemed to be an error that many have fixated on. And off record, a few people seem to have said this case would not have gone this long and we would have known who done it a long time ago. So uh, that's just that's just where we're at. So I'm ready to move on to the next slide, if you will. Okay. So thank you again, Mina. So the killer's impact, this is important to understand. And I've given a few talks on this, and I really sit around and think about you have what happened to Renee, which is just mind blowing. Okay. But then you just look at the killer's impact. And when I have the families highlighted, I'm not even talking about like as a writer, and I don't even think my book achieves this. I'm making fun of a book I wrote. I'm like that and I will do that, but I'm being objective about my book. If I didn't generate something because my first stepfather's health is up and down, if I didn't kind of ride that wave of weight, the cops relieved that as a person of interest, and let's try and get something out there and then let others do something with this and kind of carry the torch, which people have done, which I'm very excited about. Some people I don't want to personally talk to, um, but I've been very pleased that people are really carrying the torch and moving forward. It's great. I I think if I were to write something else or rewrite my own book, I would probably try to investigate how this impacted families. And I'm not just talking Renee's family. I'm talking person of interest one's family, person of interest two's family. Now, the variable is there, would they even talk to me? And I'll get to those answers a little bit later, so hang on. But I was really over time after the book came out thinking about God, how are these the families impacted? So you have Renee's mother, okay, and her Renee's mother and um her father were separated at the time. He lived in a town about 20 minutes away, give or take. So there she is, and Renee has a younger brother. So look at the impact and damage that's going to do, but also look at the damage if it. The truth is, a male juvenile did this, which I'm going to get to later. That family knew or had to know or had to learn that. So look at the impact that it had on them, and it's just so like soul crushing when you think about that. And then we can't stop there because then you look at the neighborhood, which is neighbors that either one, oh my God, there's a killer in the neighborhood, or a killer invaded our neighborhood. So it could be boogeyman out of nowhere. Someone in our neighborhood's a killer. Everybody, every parent, every kid, every sibling is holding each other a little bit tighter in these weird times because in the late 70s, this ain't happening in this small community. So this happens. You have the neighborhood that's shocked. You get the town that's absolutely shocked. And I'll just pause on the town for a second. And kind of Mina asked me earlier at the top of this, yes, aside from my connection to my first stepfather, who, to his credit, really wouldn't tell me anything. And I know that's hard for some people to believe, like, yeah, right. But I mean, I lived with him and I didn't know he didn't even make one mistake for me to find anything. Not that I would have been like, what are you working on? But I think just in terms of the town, there when I started the Facebook group, and multiple people have had two administrators since who I really trust, and one was a close friend from my hometown. He did a wonderful job, and he needed a break, and I'm not going to explain those reasons. He did a wonderful job, but he and I, when I first reached out to him about this case, were both born in '78, 1 year after it. Like I said, 7 to 9, 10 years. We're in these neighborhoods, we're riding bikes, we're skateboarding, we're going into the woods, playing cowboys and Indians, which obviously not doing that anymore, but in terms of the times, but we're doing all these, war games, playing around, messing around, and like we never heard of this crime at all. No parents, no warning, no, don't go into that neighborhood, don't go out late at night, don't go by yourself. So it was kind of we had this initial shock of then I'm like, wait, my best friend growing up doesn't know about this. I reach out to somebody else, never heard of it, never heard of it, never heard of it. So it's like when I'm talking about killer's impact, he he really shut up this community. He really shut them up. Now it's obviously it is shocking to take the life of an 8-year-old girl in the manner in which it was done. But look at the power and the impact. So when people are like, it's been 48 years, the cops aren't doing this, they're not doing enough. It's like you have to realize like I said, the impact and power of the act and the shock and what it did to people. Now, obviously, impact of the cops. I could talk for stepfather. I've kind of hinted at how he cares about it. I've spoken to old, former cops who worked the case who didn't want to give me a quote for the book and this and that, but the consistent the consistent line from them is, I just want this solved before I die. And even a few of them admitted, I thought it was person A, he thought it was person B. And we argued and argued and argued and argued and argued. And the other constant nowadays with these old vets who are like 75 in their 80s are like, I don't care about being right anymore. I just want it solved. So, not suggesting there was a huge divide back in the day, but it just seems like, it could have gone either way, and depending on who cops looked at. And but it just goes to show you how much they care. Now, one thing I should point out where you have an old Bridgeport Post, which is now the Connecticut Post, you have an old photo of, you guessed it, the Warrens. Some people just know them from the Conjuring movies, but they lived in Monroe, Connecticut, a few minutes. Well, yeah, I mean, not so far from where I have lived, but they were brought in, specifically Lorraine was brought in on this case. So I put that in there as like, whether it's a fun fact or you find that interesting, but it just goes to show you like the cops in the community back in the day really pulled out of the stops. They're like trying psychics, trying this and that. It's just, you know, and, but it also goes to show you, if you walk it back, that this is a 48-year-old crime, where we were with DNA versus where we are now. And now you have a killer who did this with a rock in the woods, and what kind of DNA was on the rock, what, was it found, and when it was found, what was on it, so it's like, that's something that's important that I have to share as a writer. So if anybody's wondering or confused, or if they picked up my book, which you're not required to by any stretch, I didn't get access to police files. I was not, my FOIA request was denied. Now, I didn't care, and I just kept going with what I had access to, which is a limited batch of material. And there is somebody I'll give a shout out to, Bill Betar up at the Monroe Sun, grew up in the time, and he knew some of the main folks and the main players. And he wrote a piece about my writing in the past. And when I reached out to him, he kind of got back into this and started writing stuff. But he provided me with one or probably like 2 to 4 older articles that I couldn't access because I was out of state. And he kind of did some legwork out of his own curiosity, but for me as well. So he's been really great for the cause as well. But it is something to think about, just overall impact, and how everybody, obviously Renee's family, people from the time, her relatives that are still alive, and there's few from what I hear, that just want closure. They just want closure, just like the cops do. And for some, it's been a big blight on the community. For some cops, it's been, nobody, people judge them harshly for not solving this one. And, just, but looking at that header, the killer's impact and how he got away with it, whether that was with help or whatever it is, it just goes to show you the power of this crime and where we currently are and why it's not solved. So I'm ready to transition. Okay. I take a little breather. So there you have Keith Morrison, a little, this is how bad and old and dated I am. I don't even know if you say GIF or GIF, whatever, but it's GI, so you got the Keith Morrison thing. So sticking with the rumors, there were plenty, and there are quite a few here that I'm not going to share. They just, and I will tell you, they're rumors that I just didn't think were worthy of wasting anyone's time. But I will tell you, the administrator that took over a Facebook group after I did, the stuff we heard, and I'll tell you, it was like devoid of judgment. We were fair to it, but you'd hear some things on a daily basis or weekly basis where we'd start in a loving manner start screaming at each other like there's no way this happened, or there's no way that's or there's no way this person made this mistake, or there's no way the cops did or didn't do this. And it like made you go absolutely insane with rage. So it's like I usually have a very even keeled, don't really care what people say about me kind of temperament, but this case kind of really fired us up. And but let's just jump right into the rumors. So, in the early readings and me learning about this crime, there was very little written. And I'm not a I'm not dismissing Reddit. I'm not familiar with Reddit. I don't have any kind of exposure to it. But it was like one old article about what happened to Renee, another old article about them looking at DNA again in 1999, and that kind of basically led to nothing. But then three, it was like a Reddit article, John Wright Jr. and all these people he killed, this guy from New Canaan, Connecticut, and he ended up at Fairfield Hills, which is oddly enough in Newtown. But it turned into this because he killed a girl once with a rock, therefore he must have killed Renee. Well, it turned into this whole, it was just someone's theory on Reddit. But people, it was kind of amazing the power, because then people would just read that and go, hey, everybody, I found this article, case closed. And it was like, whoa, like just like if it were that simple, don't you think the cops would lean into that and go arrest this guy if he were still alive or wherever he is? It just kind of, you know, the plausibility factor, the location, and this and that. You understood somebody having fun, and it was not written in any kind of, it was written in like a sincere attempt at connecting material together. But that was one of the rumors. Number two, this is a kind of a quick one. I swear that when I get to the bottom, those are a bit longer. Um, but number two, white van. When I'm talking about, so there was a landlord in the neighborhood, owned a few of the houses, the ones that he's renting out. Well, there are people doing work in the neighborhood. I don't want to say all the time, but there was somebody with a white van. So then someone theorized, well, there was a white van in the neighborhood around the time that this occurred. So therefore, that must be, somebody to look at. Do I have all the answers? Like I said, do I have access to what the police looked at in relation to the white van? No, but it was just an observation that was shared, something to look at, something to consider. Number three, the one that usually gets attention from some folks. So I'm not versed in all the st stuff with like summer solstice and all that, but in terms of the time period, this is either very close to that time. And apparently there was a witch in the neighborhood. But what caused detectives at the time to look at it was Renee, on her body, there was a mark under, under the breast area, which it their initial read on it was like a lunar shape. So therefore, considering the time period, a few of the detectives were like, we have to go talk to this neighborhood witch and see if there's a connection. And that didn't pan out to be really anything. But at the same time, I was always intrigued by it, and why I included it, I think that's personally, I could be wrong, and somebody could make fun of me, and you can. I will welcome it. But I think that's kind of you know, crossing, all the T's and dotting the I's. Like if lunar mark, summer solstice time period, you've got to investigate and look at all the possible things, just like you're including Lorraine Warren to help you out. Okay. Number four is a little bit, um, this one's a little interesting for me. And I always share that in this sense. And number four, So I'll just bill it this way. There was a young cop who lived on the street at the time. Okay, I'm not going to use his name. I'm going to avoid that just for today. But if people from the time are listening, they're going to know who I'm talking about. I've done talks before. They know who I'm talking about. It's okay. So when I started this journey and when I was on Facebook, I found this person's profile. And every former cop or retired cop I reached out to was like, can't tell you anything about the case. It's an active case. Can't really talk about that. Blah blah blah. But people were like, have you have you spoken to number four? And I reached out to him on Facebook, and it took months and months and months to get a response. So when I got home one day, after hearing all this stuff about this particular person's personality, I was like, oh my goodness, I got a reply, and he wants to talk. So I'll be honest with you, I found him to be incredibly candid. I love talking to him. I think I had three, if not four, full conversations with him in about 20 to 30 minutes in length. But what was interesting about him and his energy and why he's on this now, you can go, why is he on the rumor? The rumor list is the people who could have killed Renee list. But I'm just going to say this. His whether it was a brash that young vibe for the name and the fact that he lived in the neighborhood, people were like, wait a second, what happened with the crime? What happened with the crime scene? Why was there this type of autopsy? Was he the first one there? So after I talked to him, he was, working patrol and was just kind of basically leaving the neighborhood when he gets alerted about this. And then he calls the fire department to go and look for Renee. And obviously we know what the results are. She's found a few hours later after the 6:30 time frame. Okay. So I'll go through this a little bit quicker and I'll allow time for questions. Okay. I'm sorry if I'm pushing this a little bit longer than some people thought. I just throw that note out there. So long story short, Renee is killed. Well, this cop is spending a lot of time in the neighborhood talking to the families. Well, he's spending a lot of time around Renee's mother, and the optics of that were not looking good. He was going through a divorce. He was, checking in on her a decent amount. So the optics were, oh, I think he had something to do with it. Maybe something was going on with him and Renee's mother, and Renee witnessed something and this and that. So people kind of went down that. But my personal opinion, which take it or leave it, I found him to be incredibly candid. Everybody that talked about him is like, there's nobody like him, and he was just super candid. He left the force a few years later to take a job at GE, and he quite frankly gave me information that nobody was willing to give, and he was very excited and said, "Send me a book when it comes out." And I reached out a little bit after the release date, and his wife wrote back that he passed away from cancer. So that was kind of a blow because he was the one that was like, really one of his parting lines was, I don't think this will get solved, but if you put me in the room with this one parent, one guardian, I'll get her to talk. And that was kind of crushing because I was like, maybe this is the guy. So moving forward, we have person of interest one, number six is best friend, number seven is neighborhood bully. So look, there are three people. I'm just going to say it. 5 through 7 are the three people that people have looked at and wondered about. Okay. One, number five, POI number one, just weird sensibility, odd sense of humor, little dark. People just exhibited strange behaviors and thought there was a capacity there. Okay. Number six. Okay. Best friend. There was an article in the Hartford Courant where a girl, this is the neighbor of Renee, a few years older, was labeled the best friend. It's not a direct quote from the girl. However, it's what the reporter wrote. So I don't know if that was fed to her. It was just kind of a, now, this girl did hang out with Renee. That is a decent amount of time. That is very much accurate. But people have harped on why would she refer to herself as a best friend? I don't even think she got along with Renee that well. So it kind of opened up the door to all these questions. Number seven, neighborhood bully, which I do mention in my book. There was a boy in the neighborhood who, spoiler alert, is the brother of number six. Okay. Was boys, girls, you name it, would bully him, harass him, beat him up for no reason, grab a girl and say, "You're my girlfriend," and physically harm them. So it became, these were the kind of candidates. So we can move to the next slide. I'll kind of explain this a little bit more. So where these three candidates, if you will, have given people the most fits is person of interest, one. So that first person I mentioned, like weird, dark, sincere, hasn't talked, won't talk to people. I reached out to him directly, will not talk. Person of interest, two, the bully. There are some people particularly a little bit afraid to reach out to him. I reached out to him directly. He did not respond. Okay, I would go get coffee, offer to get a beer. No response, no response, no response. This third one, the one, like I said, has created so much debate. This female friend that was a few years older than Renee joined the Facebook group about a year ago, had one Facebook comment about her connection to Renee. I think people were a little bit on her, which I'm not saying is unfair, but then she kind of went silent and I think left the group. That last one I totally understand, even though I don't think she might know what happened. I don't think she had anything to do with it. Her caring for Renee, but not participating in this journey has just kept the door wide open here. And that's kind of unfortunate because I think if some people talked, they'd look better in the eyes of the public and you wouldn't prolong these stories. So we can move forward. Okay, this is just a quick slide to show like the movement of what this case has generated. So you have Connecticut 24. This is a host, Eric Parker, went on the news to talk about the book and the case. The second slide is people in the Facebook group. I give them so much credit. Someone designed this flyer. I don't even think she likes me very much, and that's totally okay. But I still give her A+ on creating the flyer. But people in the community were rallying, businesses were agreeing to put this up, and they made a QR code so you can, if you click that, you join the Facebook groups. We're just watching the numbers go from like 400 to 480 to 520 to 560. So like, without that communal movement, this wouldn't have generated the buzz. So there's the cover of my book. Just real quick aside, people get mad at me for pumping up my own book or whatever, but I have a publisher and there's a bottom line. You got to try and move copies, but the book is available. You can get it on Amazon, Walmart, this and that for $9.99. He has it on Anucci Press. That's ANUCI press.com for $8 right now. So his timing is pretty good if you were kind of curious. This last slide was very excited about because my first round of profits went to this is my former high school, Massac High School. They had a scholarship and award for courage in Renee's name. And this is a high school senior who got that reward a few weeks ago, and she got a check. So it was just a real nice way to kind of keep Renee's spirit alive. And that was one, an additional part of the movement. So we're pretty proud of it's beyond a book at this point. There's way more of what people have done in the community to kind of keep Renee's, name and energy and everything alive. It's been really nice to see. So we can move forward. Okay. Speaking also of movements, the people to their credit just won't quit, which has been really nice. I don't know that I'd ever write a book again and try and start a Facebook group because even I get it's just like taxed or you get your own stuff in life and that people are so emotional about things, which is fair that they are. But it can be draining and you need your breaks. But this was very exciting that the group rallied, did a GoFundMe, and there was a billboard put up in a particular area. Now, it was not put up in Monroe, Connecticut, and people were really mad. I'll be honest, there were a select few people that are like, wait a minute, it's not going to go in Monroe. Multiple people that were involved in that process thought Monroe was exhausted, meaning flyers everywhere. People supported the books. People had gone to library events, but they put it in an area, in a surrounding area where the major players had connections. So it was inevitable that somebody close, if not close to the person that did this, would not miss this. And the exciting thing is the GoFundMe, people raised enough to go up for 4 weeks, and it's still up because nobody has taken over the billboard. So that's exciting. And I'm led to believe that there's a mural in the area, which is another great thing. Um, One thing I have to say, and I think we could kind of jump to questions after this. I really do. I can make a quick note about Dateline, but Murder She Told is a podcast that covered this case. I reached out to them. They covered it. They didn't ask for my help in any way. They have their own team, and her name is Kristen Seavey. She did a wonderful job, and the cops clearly vetted her so much because they gave her comments. The cops did. The current regime did not give me any quotes from my book. They spoke to her. They gave information that wasn't known before. So it's really the starting place more so than my book, if you want to know more about this case, so we can move forward. So the updated timeline, and I'll just wrap with this, and if there's time for questions, we'll see what we can do. So we know Renee went next door, see if the friend was available. She wasn't there, 6:30. But what this podcast reveals is she was killed between 6:30 and 7. So we have a 30-minute window, which before it was like, was it 3 hours? Was it 4 hours? There was stuff written in the papers about she was killed 400 yards from her house, 300 yards from his house, 300 feet from her house. But it was also one of those that opened up the other question of like, but what are we measuring from? The back door, the front door, the side of the house? All that stuff was in the old papers that it really became, putting that together with timeline became very tricky. But credit to Kristen Seavey in this podcast. And I'm going to be real. It might sound like I'm praising her too much, but at the same time, she got the cops to be involved with all the hard work she did. And then we had a few people trash her and make it out to seem like she was doing something, which I did not appreciate. So I just have to kind of give her a real salute here because she endured all that. And whether she gets acknowledged, someone should. Okay, so what the cops revealed, Renee was killed by a male juvenile that knew her well. You go to a neighbor's house, chances are someone in the neighborhood knows you. Another note, Renee was dragged closer to her home. Would a stranger do that? I'm just asking the question out loud. Would a stranger do that? Would a stranger drag you closer to your home? I don't know that they would do that. Translation, blank killed Renee Freer. I'm not going to answer that. And then we can move to what should be the final slide. Okay, so the good news, so there's a flyer on the right. I think some people have made multiple flyers. I don't know if this bothered somebody. I don't know what they didn't like about it, but people, have their own way and want to do other things. But Dateline on Renee's 48th anniversary of the crime yesterday put an article on their true crime. It's called Cold Case Spotlight. So if you Google that, you'll find it. If anybody emailed me, I could provide you with the link. But that's exciting in terms of the attention. So that's how far this thing has gone. And the effort by most of the people in the Facebook group, the people that are connected to her, have done her old friends have done an incredible job. It's just that's where we are, and I don't know where it goes from here. And so people either, you like true crime, you buy my book as a starting place. My book is nothing more than an exposure tool. I'm not downplaying it, but that's really what it is. But if you wanted a starting place because you're curious about true crime and this specific one, starting with Murder She Told is what you should do, and then kind of go for it. But I think due to time, I should wrap there. And if I've eaten up too much time and eaten up time that would afford many questions, I apologize.
No, that was great. It was really thorough, and I appreciate that. Okay, so we do have a couple of questions in the
Sure.
Q&A, and if you have any others, just let me know, and we'll get through as
Okay.
many as we can.
Okay.
Um, First of all, I wanted to ask you if you've seen the movie Adolescence on Netflix.
I have a young child, so it's at the top of my post-it list of things to watch. And because I work in schools, I'm just very intrigued. But yeah, it's my one of my next watches. But yeah.
Well, your slide about the killer's impact was so like that movie in the sense that like it spoke to like all the people that were impacted, the cops, the neighbors, the family, the everything. So it just brought that to mind. So if for anybody who hasn't seen it, you should. It's disturbing. Okay, a couple questions from Alex. Any idea of what percentage of murders go unsolved?
Oh boy, do I any percent? It's a much bigger. I mean, I can't give you a number, Alex, and I apologize for that. I in reading early stuff with criminal justice, the number, the percentage, which I don't have that number, kind of shocked me with how high it was, but I'm encouraged by what we can do with DNA now.
Mm,
As far as cases this old, I'm not, you know, I'm not saying all the 1976 crimes are going to be solved because DNA is so good now. I'm saying they can be if you have the right thing. But the one thing that's made me insane with my like bleeding heart, mad energy sometimes is in my own ignorance in the process. So you're like, wait a minute. Oh, that's right. The cops have to go and try and sell somebody at the courts to move forward.
hmm
So you could think, which people tend to forget, like that's got to be torture for the cops. You're like, I got something. No, I've got something tangible. I think we can work. And then a lawyer says, we're not going to solve this case with that, or it's circumstantial, or it's not enough, or, and then it's back to the drawing board. And then another year or 5 years ticks by. That's going to be pretty heartbreaking. So I'm kind of encouraged with where we are with DNA. Like I personally think crimes nowadays, like good luck getting away with them forever. It's not going to happen. But these old ones that are 40 or 50, I think they're going to be rare solves, not frequent solves.
hmm Can you just remind us what was the website where you can buy your book for $8? Was it
Um,
UNCI?
it's Anucci, ANUCI, Anucci Press. And then so it's anuccipress.com. It should come right up if you type that.
Okay, so I'll put an actual link in the chat in a
Okay.
minute.
Thank you.
Um, Alex also wanted to know, do you know who your stepfather thinks killed Renee, and do you agree with him?
I will say this, and I don't like to put former family into a position where they have to like answer, like put them in a he was one when I was mentioning earlier that I don't care who did it anymore. That was as much as I got out of him, that there was clearly a divide between two people that could have done it. And they were both male juveniles.
Huh. But one of them knew Renee well.
One of them knew Renee well and one of them didn't. However, one of them, from what I gather, that they both were on the same bus. So
Hmm.
that's right. You really you parse those words. I mean, I can know somebody I barely talk to. I can know a coworker pretty well, but not be very friendly with them. So then it begs the question, right?
Right. G asks, what happened to the rock? Did it become part of the police evidence?
Well, I'm completely hopeful that it did. Like I said, me not having access to the files, I don't know. I've heard plenty of rumors about this and that happening. Now, the one thing I had somebody, a former attorney come up to me at an event, one of the early events, and he goes, you could have contested that FOIA. And I was like, what? He goes, you probably could have contested that FOIA and then gotten access to the files. And I was like, are you serious? So, in my own ignorance in the process, like, and of course, I get that information after the book's published, but I don't know. I'm not saying now. I I say that, but this is also a 48-year-old case, and can you imagine the size of the files here? I
Mm.
mean, I can assure you this is not just like picking up Anna Karenina, like an 800-page book. This is probably thousands and thousands and thousands of pages over the years. So, but in my ignorance, I could have contested the FOIA as I would think anybody can. Now, I don't know what your counter or your argument is to secure that. I didn't do enough homework. I'm admitting that. But it was one of those things where wow, I had no idea. My good friend who was the administrator was sitting there going, "Are you serious?" So, but I don't have all the answers for the rock because the cops didn't tell me.
Okay. Well, Carla asked, was DNA testing even being done in 1977? Were there any blood, tissue, hair, or other samples taken by police or in the autopsy that you know of? Because it sounds like you don't, there, you're,
There's in terms of articles in this, they said there was something found under the fingernails. And like I said, when I walk it back to that lunar mark, some wondered whether that was a bite mark. And they brought in Dr. Henry Lee to test this out. Now, I don't think that led to anything. It didn't lead to, oh, it's his or her teeth. It I would just call it not enough, not sufficient enough to prove that. It would just, I think that was Dr. Henley. This is from what I heard from from the one cop that was deceased that was telling me this stuff. He was the one that said they went down that route because he goes, that looks like a bite mark.
hmm hmm So if they were able to do DNA and they thought it was a bite mark, they could have identified somebody.
They could have, in terms of like the testing and dental work and this and that and how it would match. It's quite frankly really interesting. um there was something, I won't ruffle a bunch of feathers, but there was this rumor, which I can't totally prove, but it's come up multiple times, about Renee being buried with a stuffed animal and that also impacting the area where there was something. So obviously she was exhumed at one point. So when you do that and then you're like, we're targeting this one area, well, now, which is another thing I mentioned in my book, which kind of makes you rage out loud because it's just like not the mistake. Because you're just like, how heartbreaking is that? You bury a sweet, innocent girl who should not have had it. She should still be alive today. Um, and something like a stuffed animal could have impacted. I say could have because I can't guarantee that. It's just I've heard it enough to go, well, that would be really tragic and sad.
hmm can I ask if you can stay an extra few minutes so we can get through all the questions?
Yeah, like 5 to 7 minutes, fine.
Yeah,
Yeah,
let's get through these then. Are the
sure.
police not responding to you because it's an ongoing investigation, do you think?
When I so my initial I talk about this in the book. So I don't think I said this, and I'll say this quick. The way I wrote the book was me learning about the case. Like the book reads that way. It's me discovering the case, my connection to the case, and then what happened with me reaching out to people and this and that. It's not like I'm capturing the whole neighborhood vibe and I'm setting the whole scene, which some people like how it's written because it's like I feel like I'm learning it with you. And some are like, I don't read most true crime books like that. Others have not loved that about it. Like I don't, you know, but I reached out to the cops working in the case and just had mentioned that I might write something, and they're just, my initial tone, I'm not naturally fresh. I'm a little grumpy, but I was just like, this is a cold case. And he's like, it's an active case. I was like, well, it's 47 years. I don't know how that's active. Um, so you had a little a little verbal wrestling there. But I think once, not just my connection to my first stepfather, because he wasn't really talking to them. It's kind of like it's new regime. This is moving on. He's been retired a long time. He doesn't really know them. It became once it was written about in the press by that man I mentioned, Bill Bitar, the Monroe son. Well, he has to deal with them on a weekly basis. So I don't know if he said something.
Hmm.
They didn't work with me. They didn't give me anything, but they were also like, it went from a why are you writing a book to all of a sudden a month or two later, there's a statement to the press and they're not trashing my book thinking we're going to ride some extra exposure to the case here.
hmm
You know what I mean? But I also think, look, you say you're writing a book about a case. I'm sure they're also a little bit fearful. Are you going to trash us? Are you going to trash the old cops? I don't want to tell you too much. And then if I work in education, so you speak like, oh yeah, Johnny, Mr. Jones is a real tough history teacher. You tell that to a parent, you're like trashing that teacher. So it's like they have that's how they have to be. So I completely understood it. And that's why I really endorse that podcast that I mentioned, Murder She Told. It's not even just because it's a podcast. I know people were trying to do things after it. I know people were unfair to her. But when I sit back and I'm objective about it, I'm going, They vetted her programs, and there's hundreds of episodes. They vetted her to the point where they clearly got approval to speak about this and share information that was never shared before. And moving forward, why aren't they talking to other podcasts? Mm-hmm. It's clearly her research style or her preparation won them over, that they knew this is a good one to get. This is a good one. We can do this. With me, they didn't know. I wasn't announcing, oh, yeah. They didn't even know what it was going to be like. Yeah. It was kind of like, you're writing a book. Who are you going to mention? Like that was kind of, we were kind of at the like civil, but they're not going to be specific with me. I'm not going to be specific with them.
Okay. All right. I just want to get to two more questions.
Sure.
I'm going to put these two together. Okay. Who decided that Renee was killed by a male who was familiar to her, and what caused that conclusion to be arrived at? But also, do you know why police believe the assailant was a juvenile and a male, not an adult or a female?
Well, these are wonderful questions, and they're the questions that should be asked. And I wish I could just say, I could give you a definitive why it's not an adult versus a juvenile. I'm thinking because this timeline was officially narrowed, and I think the cops personally, this is a stretch, but if most of, sure, it doesn't account for every adult in the neighborhood. But my point is, if a lot of the middle schoolers and all this were either at parties or hanging out in a different area, and it's now a 6:30 to 7 p.m. window, and then her body's moved closer to her house, why would a stranger do that? Why would somebody familiar with her do that? Mm. I mean, I understand if you're like, I'm not going to leave her behind my house, but you're going to drag her so then you have knowledge about where she lives. So then it's like, well, why would you do that as well? I think if you read more about this and start asking, if you join the Facebook group, you start talking to people, you're going to learn about the behaviors in the neighborhood. You're going to learn about somebody that everyone was afraid of. Mm. Now, I have said this, that and you mentioned adolescence, a constant, frequent bully does not guarantee murderer. Mm-hmm. And I've really worked through it. My whole journey was, I had to stop, and I get this. This is when people get the most heated. It's like the need to be right. I'm like, I don't need to be right. But I will say, I did wonder, she was struck twice with this rock. Okay, like I said, I don't have all the details of what was on the rock in this now. Struck twice. So it begged the question, could a juvenile have done it and then a parent have helped in some capacity? Because how does this stay silent for so long? A 13-year-old's that crafty? A 13-year-old's going to do that, clean up, boom, nobody figures it out without any assistance? It makes you, so I've frequently gone, did a juvenile, my brain can go there. Did a adult, I don't even want to say adult male, but did an adult, did a father, somebody finish the job because he mortified at what a son did? Or maybe not even mortified, but you have to consider all those things. I can really get on board with a lot of things with my imagination. I can't see a 13-year-old doing this in an isolated fashion, going home, staying quiet about it. Years pass, nobody knows. That's just, I think there had to be some error that some parents or guardians knew something. And then it was oh my, this is an in-house, stay within the family thing. And the people closest to Renee, it's not fun to hear. And I don't throw this in anybody's face, but I grew up in a very abusive household, and I'm incredibly fortunate to say I was not abused, but my father was a terror. And when I heard about a particular household on the street, it didn't sound much different. When you grow up in those environments, you don't really have a sense of like good. You don't value people who are nice and good. You actually probably dislike them strongly.
Hmm.
And I'm not saying that's like the cause of all this, but it makes me reflect and think, if my father, which my father went to jail, but he, guess what? The law, you got in trouble. The law caught you, right?
Hmm.
Like we then as sons, my brother and I take ownership and go, God, we got to reflect and deal with this. Now it's all, but it's one of those things I've looked at in my life and going, if my father did something and I was in the woods with him and he said, you better shut your out for life or I will, I never would say anything.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
that's not even a guarantee that if he passed away, I'd be running to the cops. I'd be like, ha. So the point in this case, which is so tragic too, when I'm talking about killer's impact earlier, it's like nobody wants to, and this is people get really mad at me for this. Nobody wants to, but I can assure you there are people connected to this killer who have been tortured their whole life, who just learned of it, learned that their sibling or maybe father was involved or whatever it may be. And because they've just been terrified or forced into that lie forever, I can't vilify them. You just want this to end and you want closure for the Freer family, that people that are still alive, and you just because that's what anyone deserves.
Hmm.
But the deprived of that is what tortures everyone.
Hmm.
It's weird because you can, it's the refusal to acknowledge and the refusal to, like I said, it's not easy to rat out somebody if you think he or she already killed somebody. They already threatened me to stay quiet.
Hmm.
It's easy for us to go rat him out, go rat him out. This is, yeah, no, when they're still breathing.
Hmm.
And they're only, if they're only 60, 61, some 60, 61 year olds are still intimidating.
Hmm.
I see, I have a part-time job. I see 80-year-old rich people that are intimidating. You're like, oh, wow, wow, this person's really a scary individual. So you just don't know what conditions they were forced to live in
Hmm.
post crime. But obviously, first and foremost, the Freer family, the neighbors, the friends of Renee, they deserve closure the most. You know, I think people connected to the killer deserve to be able to exhale finally and be like, oh my God. Unfortunately, I don't see anybody ratting him out and I don't see him going to the cops. So I don't. So this is really going to come down to the cops getting something with the DNA and the advancements of DNA and the courts going boom, good enough, we're going.
Hmm. Wow.
And yeah, so I think that's where we should close.
Yeah, actually, I would have to agree with Teresa that you have made me think about things in a very different way. I appreciate that. But thank you so much for this incredibly thorough discussion about this case that we hope gets solved because
Yeah.
it's heartbreaking.
No, it is, and like I said, I've thrown this out at events. Now I will end with this before well, thank everybody for coming here, but I've said this at events, and I'm very quick. You see actors do this; they go play somebody in a movie, and they're like, "I feel like I had a special connection with this like deceased person they played," which I could still be moved by them playing a part. But look, I just think somebody killing a young girl is about the worst thing in the world. Any child, anything. I think that is just vile and horrible, but it's worse to not take ownership for it and for there to be no closure. But my motor, I'm not going to pretend to have some special connection with Renee. My motor has been for my first stepfather, and that's what it's about for me. So
Mm.
what it means to other people, they have their own personal connection to Renee, and I want that solved for them more than life itself. But yeah, I I I do stuff behind the scenes for it, but I gotta move on because I got my own stuff. But it is one of those things where I don't pray all that much, which might be a tell, but I'm praying the cops have something, and that's just it's but impatience is also a dangerous thing because you can go when is this, and they could be they could get an answer in 18 months.
Mhm.
And does it go in their favor? I don't know. But all right, I could keep going all night, so I don't want to do that. I gotta go and say goodnight to
Oh.
my child.
Eric, thank you so much. And for everybody who's been here, wonderful questions. And I will be in touch soon. I hope you read the book and learn a bit about it. And I will certainly be keeping an eye on this case.
Well,
So,
thank you so much.
yeah. Good night, everybody.